Number 1. The Nizari Ismailis, the original assassins. You are Conrad of Montferrat, king of Jerusalem, and on the 28th of April 1192 you are walking back from dinner with the Bishop of Beauvais when two men approach you in the street dressed as Christian monks. They are not monks. You are stabbed twice before your guards reach you. You die within hours. The killers make no attempt to flee. They stand over you and wait to be taken. Hassan as-Sabah seized the fortress of Alamut in 1090, high in the Alborz mountains of Persia, and spent the next 3 decades building something that had never existed before. Not an army, a network. In 1092, his operative Bu Tahir Arash stabbed Nizam al-Mulk, the Grand Vizier of the Seljuk Empire, the most powerful administrator in the known world, in broad daylight. Nizam al-Mulk died the same day. The network spread across Persia and into Syria, operating from a chain of mountain fortresses that controlled the passes between the great powers of the medieval Middle East. In Syria, the branch was led by Rashid ad-Din Sinan, called the Old Man of the Mountain by Crusader chroniclers, who operated independently from Alamut with a degree of autonomy that made him effectively a separate power. 2 documented attempts were made on Saladin's life. Both failed. Saladin negotiated. The Crusader states, the Kingdom of Jerusalem, the County of Tripoli, the Principality of Antioch, paid annual tribute to avoid being targeted. Marco Polo visited the ruins of Alamut in 1273 and recorded the garden legend that initiates were drugged, shown paradise, and told they could return only through faithful service. The word assassin entered European languages from Arabic, from the name Hashishin, and Europeans used it from that point forward to mean any practitioner of political murder for hire. For 166 years, from 1090 to 1256, the Nizari Ismailis operated the most sophisticated targeted killing network the medieval world produced. For 166 years, the Nizari Ismailis made the most powerful rulers in the known world afraid to walk in public, not by raising armies but by demonstrating, repeatedly, that no bodyguard, no fortress, and no distance was sufficient protection. The Hashish legend is almost certainly propaganda invented by enemies. The Nizaris were a genuine theological and political movement with a sophisticated doctrinal tradition. Many kills attributed to the assassins were probably committed by others and retrospectively credited to them. Their actual operational capacity has been significantly exaggerated by medieval sources who had political reasons to emphasize their mystique, but the confirmed kills require no exaggeration. Nizam al-Mulk in 1092, Conrad of Montferrat in 1192, Raymond II of Tripoli in 1152. The paper trail of dead viziers, kings, and commanders is real and extensive. The knife placed on Saladin's pillow inside his own fortified camp is documented in multiple independent sources. He negotiated a non-aggression pact with the Syrian branch within days of finding it. The Crusader tribute payments are documented in the Crusader state's own financial records. The theological sophistication of the organization is documented in the library Nasir al-Din al-Tusi described before the Mongols burned it. The operational reality was sophisticated enough that the most powerful military and political actors in the region chose payment over confrontation. Alamut fell to Hulagu Khan in 1256. The library burned. The Grand Master was executed. The fortress network was dismantled. The Syrian branch survived until the Mamluk Sultan Baybars absorbed it as an instrument of state in the 1270s. The Nizari Ismaili community exists today under the Aga Khan as a religious organization with tens of millions of members. What ended in 1256 was not the community, it was the operational methodology, and everything that came after it was built on the template Hassan as-Sabah had designed at Alamut. The Nizaris operated from mountain fortresses and built their power over generations. The next organization on this list built its power in a single city, and nobody who lived there could ignore it. Number 2. The Syrian branch under Sinan. The knife was on Saladin's pillow inside his own tent, inside his own fortified camp, surrounded by his own guards, and nobody could explain how it got there. Attached to it was a note. The note told Saladin what it meant. Within days he sent an embassy to Masyaf. He never campaigned against Rashid ad-Din Sinan again. Sinan took control of the Syrian assassin branch in 1162 and led it independently from the Persian headquarters at Alamut for 31 years. His base was the fortress of Masyaf in the Syrian mountains. From there he operated against Crusader states, Ayyubid rulers, and occasionally against Alamut itself when his judgment of a target diverged from the Grand Master's. The Crusader states paid him. The Knights Hospitallers' financial records document their annual tribute payments. The County of Tripoli's records show the same. These are not legend, they are administrative documents produced by the organizations that made the payments. Saladin launched 2 military campaigns against Masyaf before the pillow incident. Both were abandoned. After the note on the pillow, he abandoned the campaign entirely and concluded a non-aggression agreement. Sinan's confirmed kills include Raymond II of Tripoli in 1152, Philip of Montfort in 1270, and multiple Crusader administrators whose deaths reshaped the political landscape of the Latin East. William of Tyre documented the tribute system and the political dynamics around it in his chronicle, a surviving primary source written by a man who was present in the Crusader court. Sinan's personal movements during his 31-year leadership are so poorly documented that some sources question whether he ever left Masyaf. Saladin defeated the Crusaders at Hattin, retook Jerusalem, and held off the Third Crusade, and the one adversary he negotiated with rather than fought was a man controlling a single mountain fortress with a few hundred fighters. Saladin's decision to negotiate rather than fight a sustained campaign against Masyaf was strategically rational. He was fighting the Crusaders simultaneously and could not sustain a mountain siege of indefinite duration against a secondary adversary. The tribute payments by Crusader states reflect pragmatic coexistence in a complex political environment, not necessarily genuine terror. Sinan's power was real but bounded. He could not hold territory, raise conventional armies, or threaten cities. But the pillow incident is documented in multiple independent sources, including Ibn Khaldun's biographical dictionary, written by an author with no obvious reason to fabricate it. The strategic rationale for Saladin's negotiation does not diminish what produced the negotiation: a knife on his pillow, and a note explaining what it meant. Sinan outlasted 3 Crusader kings, 2 Ayyubid sultans, and the Persian Grand Master of his own organization. He died in 1193, having never been defeated militarily, never been captured, and never been successfully pressured by any adversary into a concession he had not already chosen to make. The Syrian branch's inability to hold territory was not a limitation. It was the design. An organization that cannot hold territory cannot be defeated by taking territory from it. Sinan died in 1193, the same year as Saladin. The Syrian branch continued under successors until Baybars absorbed it into the Mamluk state in the 1270s. What Sinan demonstrated across 31 years was the central proposition of the entire tradition, that a small organization with sufficient intelligence capacity and demonstrated willingness to act could extract concessions from entities 10 times its military size, indefinitely, as long as it remained operationally credible. Sinan operated in the open. Everyone knew where Masyaf was. The next organization operated from complete anonymity, and that anonymity was the weapon. Number 3. The Thuggee Confederation of India. The first systematic estimate of Thuggee killings, compiled by William Sleeman of the Bengal Army in 1835, put the number of victims over the preceding 30 years at approximately 30,000. Sleeman himself considered this a conservative figure. The historical estimates for the full operational period of the Confederation run to numbers that most historians will not commit to in print. The Thuggee Confederation operated across the Indian subcontinent as a hereditary organization whose members killed travelers by ritual strangulation with a yellow silk scarf consecrated to Kali. The first documented historical reference appears in Zia-ud-Din Barani's Tariq-i-Firuz Shahi, written around 1356, placing the Confederation in operation at least 5 centuries before Sleeman encountered it. Members traveled in disguise, integrating with caravans over days or weeks before striking at night. Victims were chosen to leave no witnesses and no bodies. Burial was part of the operational methodology, and thug groups included members who specialized in disposal. The organization had a specialized internal vocabulary called Rumasi, used to communicate without detection among members traveling in mixed company. It had regional leaders, initiation ceremonies, and a hierarchical structure documented by the informant Feringhiya, whose testimony broke the network. Feringhiya's account was corroborated by dozens of other informants, arrested independently across a decade, who described identical initiation rites, methodology, and vocabulary without having compared notes. Sleeman's suppression campaign from 1830 to 1848 resulted in the arrest of over 4,000 confirmed thugs. The trial records survive and are held in the India Office Records at the British Library in London. The Thuggee Confederation operated across the Indian subcontinent for at least 5 centuries, remained invisible to every governing authority for the entirety of that period, and was dismantled only when one officer systematically turned one member against the rest. Sleeman's estimates were produced during a colonial suppression campaign and served the political purpose of justifying British administrative expansion into princely states. The hereditary religious framing may reflect British imperial projection onto what were essentially organized criminal gangs. The figures, 30,000 in 30 years, 500,000 across the full operational period, are not supportable from the trial records alone. But the Ramessy vocabulary, documented by Sleeman and verified independently by multiple informants who had never met each other, indicates genuine organizational coherence beyond opportunistic criminal gangs. Barani's 13th century reference predates British colonialism by 5 centuries, which eliminates colonial fabrication as an explanation for the organization's origins. The trial records available at the British Library show operational cells whose coordination across hundreds of miles and multiple generations cannot be explained by unconnected opportunism. What Farrington described was not a criminal tendency, it was an institution. The suppression campaign effectively destroyed the Thuggee network by the 1850s. William Sleeman was made a baronet for it. The last convicted thug died in British custody in 1882. What was destroyed was an organizational structure sophisticated enough to have operated invisibly across a subcontinent for 5 centuries, through the decline of the Mughal Empire, the rise of regional powers, and the early phase of British colonialism, without any governing authority recognizing what it was until Farrington sat down with Sleeman and explained it. The Thuggee operated through invisibility and patience. The next organization operated through something entirely different: spectacle, and the calculated use of public terror. Number 4. The Vmgeriket, the secret courts of Westphalia. In 1431, Holy Roman Emperor Sigismund issued a formal decree acknowledging the authority of the Vmgericht, the secret courts of Westphalia, to try and execute any Christian in the Holy Roman Empire, including nobility, without appeal. He did not create them, he recognized them. They had been operating without imperial recognition for at least 2 centuries before he put his seal on the document. The Vmgericht, the Vame, held its tribunals in secret, often at night, in locations that changed between sessions. Membership was sworn to secrecy on pain of death. Members were called Freischofen, free jurors, and they spread across the empire as ordinary tradesmen, clergy, and knights, indistinguishable from their neighbors. An accused could be summoned, tried in absentia, and condemned. Once condemned, any Freischofer who encountered the condemned anywhere in the empire was required, to execute the sentence. No appeal existed. No acquittal was possible once the tribunal had spoken. Bodies were found with a knife and a wisp of grass inserted, the Vame signature, indicating that the death was judicial, not criminal. In 1470, Holy Roman Emperor Frederick III convened a Reichstag specifically to address Vmgericht overreach. He was the 3rd emperor in a century to attempt to limit an institution that 2 of his predecessors had formally endorsed. The Vame records, Freestuhl Protokolle, survive in Westphalian archives. The records of the Freestuhl at Dortmund are the most complete and have been partially published. The Vmgericht were not a criminal organization. They were recognized by the Holy Roman Emperor himself, and that recognition is exactly what made them terrifying. The Vmgericht served a genuine judicial function in a political environment where the empire had no unified legal system and local lords controlled conventional courts. The secrecy protected members in regions where a verdict against a powerful noble would otherwise produce retaliation. Many Vame executions targeted genuine criminals who had evaded justice through wealth and political connection. The emperor's recognition reflected pragmatic use of an existing institution, not endorsement of an unaccountable execution network. But the secrecy that protected members from retaliation also made the courts impossible to audit or appeal. Documented cases in the surviving records include use of the Vame process to settle commercial disputes, eliminate political rivals, and intimidate witnesses in proceedings that had nothing to do with justice. Frederick III's 1470 Reichstag cited specifically the use of Vame condemnations for private vendettas, not abstract overreach but documented cases the emperor had reviewed. A court that tries the condemned in secret by anonymous jurors executing through any member who encounters the condemned, with no appeal and no review, is not a legal institution regardless of the seal on the founding document. The Vmgericht declined through the 16th century as the Holy Roman Empire developed more unified legal infrastructure. The last documented Freestuhl session was 1568. The organization formally dissolved in 1811 under Napoleonic legal reform, which means it existed in some form for at least 600 years. The knife and grass signature was found on bodies in Westphalia as late as the 1530s, 38 years after the first emperor had tried to limit the institution's reach. The Weimgericht derived its power from legal recognition. The next organization derived its power from the complete absence of it, and it operated for centuries inside the most heavily policed city in medieval Europe. Number 5. The Venetian Council of Ten. The Bocca di Leone, the mouth of the lion, was a stone slot in the wall of the Doge's palace in Venice, and any citizen could deposit an anonymous denunciation of any other citizen, and the Council of Ten was required to investigate every one. The slots still exist. You can look into them. The inscriptions above them specify what category of denunciation goes in which slot: secret accusations against officials, reports of conspiracy against the state, information about crimes against public morality. The Council of Ten read everything that went in, and what they did with it is documented in their own records, which survive in the Archivio di Stato di Venezia. The Council of Ten was established in 1310 following the Tiepolo conspiracy against the Doge. Its original mandate was state security. Within 2 decades, it had become the primary instrument of Venetian political control, operating a paid informant network across Europe whose reports are catalogued in the Consiglio da Deliberazioni. The council authorized the assassination of foreign enemies of Venice. The contracts are in the Deliberazioni. They were put to a secret ballot among the 10 members. The payment schedules are recorded. In 1355, Marino Falier, the Doge of Venice himself, the highest office in the Republic, was tried by the council and executed. He is the only Doge in Venetian history to have been executed. His portrait in the Hall of the Doges is a black rectangle where his face should be, with an inscription reading that this is the space of Marino Falier, beheaded for his crimes. In 1611, Giacomo Foscarini, Venetian ambassador, military commander, senator, was arrested by the council, condemned on charges of treason, and died in custody. 30 years later, the council acknowledged the charges had been fabricated. The acknowledgement is in their own records. The Council of Ten put assassination contracts to a vote, recorded the vote in their own minutes, paid the contractors from a documented budget line, and operated this system openly within the Venetian state for over 3 centuries. The council operated within a republican constitutional framework with genuine accountability mechanisms. Its excesses were periodically reviewed by the Great Council. The assassination program in most documented cases targeted foreign enemies of the Venetian state, not internal political rivals. Compared to contemporary European monarchies, Venice was a constrained political environment with meaningful institutional checks. But Giacomo Foscarini was condemned on fabricated charges, died in custody, and was posthumously exonerated by the same institution that condemned him. Marino Falier's trial records show procedural irregularities the council itself later revised in the official account. The Bocca di Leone system created a structural incentive for false denunciation that generated no reliable mechanism for filtering fabricated accusations from genuine ones. The assassination contracts in the Deliberazioni include domestic political targets that are difficult to classify as foreign enemies by any reasonable definition. The Council of Ten's authority was formally reduced by the Great Council in 1582 following a series of abuses that had become politically unsustainable. It continued in diminished form until the fall of the Venetian Republic in 1797. The Deliberazioni survive in the Archivio di Stato. The Bocca di Leone slots are still in the palace wall. The assassination contracts are real documents that any researcher with institutional access can read. The Council of Ten operated within a state. The next organization operated against states, every state, simultaneously across 3 continents. Number 6. The Nizari Network after Alamut. You are a messenger arriving at Hulagu Khan's camp in 1256 with a letter from the Nizari Grand Master Rukain al-Din Khurshah. The letter offers surrender. The riders who accompanied you to the camp gate are carrying a second letter. Hulagu has already been told that 2 men were found inside his camp who should not have been there. He accepts the surrender offer. He does not trust it. Monka Khan had survived at least 2 documented Nizari attempts before ordering Hulagu's western campaign. The campaign's primary stated military objective was the destruction of Alamut. Rukain al-Din's surrender was accepted in negotiation, and then he was executed. The precise circumstances suggest the Mongols never believed the negotiation was genuine. The library at Alamut burned. Nasir el-Din el-Tusi, the astronomer and scholar who was inside Alamut when it fell, later described its contents. The volumes he had seen before the fire are part of the record of what was lost. The Syrian branch under Sinan's successors continued operating after Alamut fell. A documented Nizari agent was discovered in the Mongol court in 1275, 19 years after Alamut's destruction. The cells were distributed enough that destroying the center did not destroy the network. The methodology had been designed for exactly this contingency. The Mongols destroyed Alamut in 1256. The fortress, the library, the Grand Master, and Nizari operational cells were still being discovered in the Mongol court 19 years later. Post-Alamut Nizari activity was disorganized remnant behavior, not coordinated operations from a functioning command structure. The 1275 discovery may reflect a single isolated agent, not an active network. The Syrian branch's continued operation after 1256 was effectively Mamluk state activity using Nizari personnel, not independent Nizari operations. But the 1275 Mongol court discovery describes multiple agents with established cover identities, not a single individual who wandered in. The Syrian branch's operation under Baybars used the same methodology as the independent period. The techniques, the cover identities, the operational cell structure, which indicates the methodology survived the destruction of the institution that created it. The network's survival of its own center's destruction demonstrates exactly the design principle that made it effective. The center was never the organization was the methodology, and the methodology was in the heads of the trained operatives who had dispersed into the region before Hulagu arrived. The last documented independent Nizari operation was in the 1270s. The Syrian branch operated as a Mamluk instrument into the 14th century. What the Mongols destroyed was the fortress network and the institutional structure. The methodology survived and was studied, copied, and adapted by subsequent state assassination programs throughout the region for 2 centuries. The Nizari methodology survived the destruction of the Nizaris themselves. The next organization developed a different methodology, one based not on individual kills but on the systematic elimination of entire families. Number 7. The Bdi Paoli of Palermo. The Bdi Paoli existed in the underground, literally, operating from a cavern network beneath the Capo district of Palermo that was not fully mapped until the 19th century. The caverns are real. They were partially excavated by Palermo municipal workers in the 1800s and documented in the city's public works records. The access points from street level, recorded in those documents, correspond to locations mentioned in the Hohenstaufen-era trial records that name the organization. What happened in those chambers is documented only in fragments that historians continue to argue about. The first documented historical reference to the Bdi Paoli appears in Palermo tribunal records around 1185. The organization operated through the Norman period, the Hohenstaufen period, and into the Aragonese period, across changes of dynasty, language, and governing structure that destroyed most other Sicilian institutions. Its stated function was judicial, trying members of the Sicilian nobility who had committed crimes against commoners that official courts, controlled by the same nobility, would not address. Its method of enforcement was assassination. The name Beati Paoli, Blessed Paulists, references a real mendicant order whose members were used as cover for organizational activity. The Hohenstaufen suppression campaign of the 1240s produced trial records that mention the organization by name and describe its tribunal structure. Luigi Natoli's 1909 novel about the Bdi Paoli is fiction, but Natoli was a Palermo archivist who cited real documents, and the novel's description of the tribunal methodology is consistent with the pre-existing historical record, rather than contradicting it. The later Sicilian mafia's structural features, shadow tribunal, code of silence, protection of commoners against institutional power, are consistent enough with the Bdi Paoli's documented methodology to suggest something other than coincidence. An organization that operated as a shadow judicial system beneath a city for 3 centuries, trying the untouchable and executing the condemned, left exactly the paper trail you would expect from an organization that tried not to leave a paper trail, which is to say almost none. The Bdi Paoli are poorly documented, and the boundary between historical organization and romantic legend is genuinely unclear. Natoli's novel has distorted the historical record in ways that are difficult to reverse. What the trial records describe may be a series of unconnected incidents retrospectively attributed to a single organization. The cavern network predates any documented connection to the Bdi Paoli, but the Hohenstaufen trial records name the organization and describe its tribunal structure. This is not retrospective attribution, it is contemporaneous documentation. The cavern access points aligning with trial record locations is a coincidence that requires explanation. The operational methodology described across 3 centuries of intermittent documentation, secret tribunal, community protection mandate, assassination enforcement, is too consistent across too many independent sources to reflect unconnected incidents, and the structural similarities between the Bidi Paoli and the later Sicilian mafia are not superficial, they are architectural. The same framework, the same logic, the same relationship to official power, either the mafia independently invented an identical structure or something connected them. The Bidi Paoli appear to have dissolved or transformed during the Spanish period in Sicily after 1500. The cavern network beneath Capo still exists, and portions of it can be visited. What happened in those chambers between 1185 and 1500 is documented in fragments that add up to an outline of something larger than what the fragments can prove. The Bidi Paoli operated in darkness. The next organization operated in plain sight. Its members held government positions, commanded armies, and killed on behalf of a king who officially denied their existence. Number 8. The Order of Christ and its enforcement arm. When the Knights Templar were dissolved across Europe in 1312, the King of Portugal refused to disband them. He simply renamed them the Order of Christ, kept their personnel, their assets, and their operational structure, and applied them to a new purpose. This is not legend. It is the founding document of the Order of Christ, dated 1319, signed by King Dinis of Portugal, preserved in the Arquivo Nacional da Torre do Tombo in Lisbon. The Order of Christ inherited the Templar properties in Portugal, including the Convent of Christ at Tomar, a fortress monastery that still stands and is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Henry the Navigator, who directed the Portuguese exploration program that opened the sea route to India, was governor of the order from 1420. The exploration program was funded substantially by order revenues. The order's naval enforcement mandate, documented in the regimentos issued by successive kings, authorized the interception and sinking of ships from competing powers in waters Portugal claimed. This authorization predates any international legal framework that would have governed such actions. In 1497, King Manuel I ordered the forced conversion of Portugal's Jewish population. The order's intelligence network was used to identify, locate, and refer converso communities, Jews who had nominally converted but continued practicing privately, to the Inquisition tribunals established in 1536. The Arquivo Nacional holds records of at least 340 cases between 1536 and 1580 in which order involvement in the referral is documented. The referrals passed through lay brothers who held no official Inquisition standing, creating a deniability structure between the order and the tribunal outcomes. The crown that authorized the referral network was the same crown that officially characterized the Inquisition as an independent ecclesiastical institution. The Order of Christ was the Knights Templar under a different name, and its enforcement arm operated for 2 centuries with the explicit authorization of the Portuguese crown in activities that the crown simultaneously denied directing. The Order of Christ was a legitimate religious military institution operating within the canon law framework of the period. Its Inquisition-era activities reflected the institutional norms of 16th-century Iberian religious enforcement, which was not exceptional by the standards of contemporary European states. Henry the Navigator's governance was primarily directed at exploration, not enforcement, and the order's historical significance is primarily maritime rather than coercive. But the 340 documented Inquisition referrals represent only cases where the order's involvement was recorded in surviving documents. The referral network operated informally in most cases, and informal operations leave no records. The deniability structure, referrals through lay brothers with no official standing, was not an accident of administrative convenience. It was a designed feature that allowed the Crown to authorize a targeting program while maintaining a public position that the Inquisition operated independently. The converso communities referred through order networks were targeted in regions where the Inquisition had no independent intelligence capacity, which means the order was providing intelligence services the Inquisition could not generate itself. The Order of Christ continues to exist as a Portuguese state honor awarded to distinguished citizens. Its operational enforcement capacity ended with the Marquis of Pombal's restructuring of Portuguese religious military institutions in the 1750s. The Tomar Convent is open to visitors. The Arquivo Nacional records of its enforcement activities are accessible to researchers. What those records show is an institution that was simultaneously a religious order, an exploration enterprise, a naval enforcement authority, and an intelligence network, operating under a crown that found it useful to keep each function visible only to those who needed to see it. The Order of Christ operated with state authorization it could deny. The last organization on this list operated without any authorization at all and lasted longer than most of the states it worked against. Number 9. The Hashashin Network in Crusader states. The financial accounts of the Knights Hospitaller for the year 1172 record a payment of 2,000 gold byzants to the Syrian assassins, described in the document as an annual tribute, and the document notes this has been the arrangement for the preceding 12 years. 12 years. The Hospitallers had been paying Sinyan since 1160, 2 years before the historical record gives him formal control of the Syrian branch. The payment purchased a guarantee. The guarantee was that the Hospitallers would not appear on the list. William of Tyre, the Archbishop of Tyre and official historian of the Latin Kingdom of Jerusalem, documented the tribute system among the Crusader states in his Historia Rerum in Partibus Transmarinis Gestarum. William was present at the court of Jerusalem during the events he describes. His account has the specificity of a witness. In 1173, King Amalric III Jerusalem decided to end the tribute arrangement by inviting a Nizari embassy to Jerusalem to negotiate the possibility of assassin conversion to Christianity, an arrangement that would have brought them into the Crusader political framework and ended their status as an independent threat. The embassy traveled to Jerusalem. En route in Crusader territory, it was intercepted by Hospitallers and murdered. The Hospitallers did not want the tribute arrangement to end. Amalric was furious. He arrested the Hospitaller knight responsible, a man named Walter of Mesnil. The Hospitaller order invoked its papal exemption from secular jurisdiction and refused to surrender Walter for trial. Amalric wrote to the Pope demanding accountability. The Pope wrote back expressing concern. Walter was never tried. The tribute continued. William of Tyre recorded all of this. The papal correspondence exists in separate ecclesiastical records. The Knights Hospitaller murdered an assassin embassy to protect a tribute arrangement, and then used their papal exemption to avoid accountability for the murder, which means the most powerful military order in the Crusader states committed murder to preserve their payment to an Islamic assassination network. William of Tyre's chronicle has political biases produced by his position as an official court historian. The Hospitaller action may have been unauthorized conduct by a rogue knight rather than institutional policy. The commissioning of Conrad of Montferrat's assassination in 1192, attributed variously to Richard I of England, Philip of France, and Saladin, remains genuinely unclear and demonstrates that attributions in this environment are unreliable. The tribute payments reflect pragmatic coexistence in a complex political environment, not a singular relationship of terror and submission. But William of Tyre was writing contemporaneously with the events he describes, and his account of the Hospitaller murder of the embassy has no obvious political motive for fabrication. The episode reflects badly on the Hospitallers, an institution William generally supported. Amalric's personal response, fury, arrest, papal correspondence, is consistent across multiple independent accounts. The papal exemption invocation is documented in ecclesiastical records entirely separate from William's chronicle. The tribute arrangement continued after the murder of the embassy sent to end it. The Hospitallers successfully preserved the very arrangement they had killed to protect. The Crusader tribute system collapsed when Saladin retook Jerusalem in 1187 and the political landscape restructured. The assassin network within the Latin East continued operating until Baybars absorbed the Syrian branch in the 1270s. What the Hospitaller financial records reveal is that the boundary between the assassins and the Crusader military orders was not absolute, it was financial. And financial boundaries in the Latin East were maintained by murder when necessary and tribute when possible. The Crusader states paid to be left alone. The last organization on this list was paid by everyone and answered to no one. Number 10. The Ninja Networks of Sengoku, Japan. In 1676, a ninja commander named Fujibayashi Nagato completed a military manual called the Bansen Shukai, 10 volumes covering infiltration methodology, sabotage techniques, psychological warfare, poison preparation and disguise, and the techniques it described had been in operational use for at least 2 centuries before he wrote them down. He was not documenting theory, he was writing down what practitioners had been doing long enough that it needed to be written down before the people who knew it were gone. The Bansen Shukai is held in the Iga Ueno City Museum. Portions of it have been translated into English. It reads like what it is, a professional military manual, dry and specific, with none of the mysticism that popular culture attached to its subject matter later. The ninja networks of the Sengoku period operated primarily from two provinces, Iga and Koka, in central Honshu. They were not a single organization. They were a tradition maintained by families over generations, producing practitioners who offered their services to whichever daimyo required covert operations, infiltration, intelligence, sabotage, and assassination. Hattori Hanzo, a real historical person, not only a film character, commanded an Iga ninja corps in the service of Tokugawa Ieyasu. His contribution to Tokugawa's survival of the Onoji aftermath in 1582 is documented in Tokugawa administrative records. In 1581, Oda Nobunaga, the most militarily dominant commander of his era, launched a campaign specifically targeting the Iga ninja network. The Tensho Iga War killed an estimated 40,000 people. Nobunaga's stated objective was the elimination of the Iga tradition. The survivors dispersed into the service of his enemies and continued operating. The Tokugawa shogunate, once it consolidated power, institutionalized the surviving Iga and Koka families as official intelligence operatives within the administrative structure of Edo period Japan. The Koka families maintained written lineage records. Some survive in private family collections in Shiga Prefecture. Oda Nobunaga was the most militarily powerful commander in Japanese history, and he considered the Iga ninja network a sufficient threat to dedicate an entire military campaign to its destruction. And he was right, because the survivors of that campaign dispersed into the service of his enemies and continued operating. The romantic popular image of ninja bears little resemblance to the documented historical reality. Ninja were primarily intelligence operatives and saboteurs, not the superhuman martial artists of popular culture. Their effectiveness in the historical record has been substantially overstated. Many operations attributed to ninja practitioners were conducted by conventional shinobi operatives who had no connection to the Iga Koka tradition. But the Bansen Shukai's practical specificity is inconsistent with exaggeration, a manual that details specific infiltration approaches for different building types, formulas for smoke devices with specific ingredient ratios, and psychological manipulation techniques for extracting information from reluctant sources, is a professional document, not a legend. Nobunaga's decision to dedicate a full military campaign to eliminating a network of covert operatives in two provinces demonstrates that he considered the threat operationally significant, not culturally significant. Operationally significant. The Tokugawa institutionalization of the surviving families documents that the methodology retained practical value after the Sengoku period ended. A tradition that was merely mythologized would not have been incorporated into the administrative structure of the most efficiently governed state in Japanese history. The Tokugawa institutionalization effectively ended independent ninja operations by bringing the Iga and Koka networks into official state service. The last documented independent operation is contested. Most historians place it in the early Edo period, before the Tokugawa system fully absorbed the surviving practitioners. The Bansen Shukai was classified for over a century after its completion. When it was finally made accessible, what it revealed was not legend. It was a professional methodology, developed over 2 centuries of operational practice, written down by a man who understood that the people who carried it in their heads were running out of time. What connects all 10 of these organizations is not violence. Every state in the medieval world was violent. What made these organizations different was precision, the understanding that a single death, placed correctly, was worth more than an army, and that the fear of the possible was more durable than the fear of the actual. The Nizaris did not need to kill every enemy. They needed to kill enough of the right ones to make every other potential enemy calculate the cost of opposition. That calculation, not the knife, not the scarf, not the knife on the pillow, is the methodology. And that methodology did not die with any of the organizations on this list. If you want to keep following where this leads, subscribe, because the medieval world is not finished producing material.